Hello and welcome back to biology. We are going to start our last unit of the year over microbiology. And for lesson one, we're going to focus in on infectious agents. So we're going to identify some different types of infectious agents, and then we're going to also determine what treatments could be effective against those different types of infectious agents. So, what is making you sick? It's something that's causing an infection. There are several things. There's 6 of them listed here that we're going to go over today. You have the really common ones. Virus and bacteria are the two big ones. Fungi is also up there quite a ways. You have some less common ones like protozoa, helminths, and prions that we're also going to talk about. So, what is a virus? A virus is the smallest infectious agent. It has two parts. It is DNA, so that's these little squiggles in here are your DNA, and then a protein code. So it only has two real parts to it. A virus cannot reproduce on their own. They have to have a host cell, which is the cell that they're infecting or the organism they're infecting. There are not a lot of medicines that actually work to kill viruses in the human body, at least. An antibiotic will not help a virus. Antibiotic. So anti means no, and biotic is referring to bacteria. So antibiotics work on bacteria, not viruses. But depending on the virus and when they find out you've been infected, you may be able to take an antiviral medication to help you get better. But there are not a lot of antivirals out there, and they don't work on a lot of different things. Viruses change and evolve so rapidly that what may work this week may not work, in a couple of months or in a couple of years. So most viruses you have to let run their course. And that's the best way to get better. You can provide supplemental care to help get better, but overall there is no cure for a virus. Some examples of viruses are going to be the common cold. The cold most people get every winter is a form of a rhinovirus. The flu, whether it be swine flu, influenza A, influenza B, whatever type of flu it is, it's caused by a flu virus. So having a cold, having the flu, don't ask for antibiotics. They won't do you any good. Some less common ones, one that thankfully we don't have to worry about anymore due to vaccines, is polio, caused by the polio virus. And that was a very dangerous disease less than a century ago. There would be people who would get sick and end up, and there's some people still alive today with this. They have to live a large percentage of their life, if not all of their life, in a device known as an iron lung because they are not able to breathe on their own or control certain bodily functions. A couple more rare ones that we don't see too often. Ebola, which we had an outbreak of that a few years ago. And that is one of the more deadly viruses. And then rabies is also another deadly virus that can be transmitted from animals to humans. So a lot of viruses are transmitted from human to human, but when we get a new virus or a novel virus, a lot of times those come from an animal and it jumps to a human. So swine flu, as I mentioned, is believed that it came from pigs and jumped to a human. Bird flu came from birds, jumped to humans. Ebola, they believe, came from a ape or something along those lines and jumped into humans. So most viruses, depending on which family they're in, a rhinovirus, a flu virus, most often not super dangerous, but if you get into like Ebola, rabies, those sort of viruses, they can be extremely detrimental. So viruses run the whole range of, oh, these aren't really too bad, to they will kill you very quickly. Bacteria is the next infectious agent. There are, once again, a lot of different types of bacteria. Um, there will be more listed throughout this unit, but we're just going over some of the bigger ones today. So, tiny single-celled organisms that get their nutrients from the environment. So, bacteria a lot of times will survive longer on surfaces and such than viruses because they are able to at least get some nutrients for themselves. Not all bacteria are bad for us. In the human body, we have a lot of bacteria that live in our body, especially in our gut, to help us digest food or things like that. So they're not all bad. Some, though, will cause us to get sick. And depending on which bacteria is causing the infection, the treatments will vary. Your assignment today will be over antibiotics and how they came about, but antibiotics are the big thing that will help with bacterial infections. So if it is an infection caused by a bacteria, an antibiotic is going to more than likely be your best bet. But because people have overused them, and because just over time bacteria have evolved and changed, they have become more resistant to antibiotics. So if you have a bacterial infection and you start taking an antibiotic but you don't finish the course and then you get sick very quickly after with the same bacteria, more than likely you will need a stronger antibiotic because the antibiotic killed all the weak ones, but the ones that were more resistant survived. So you'll have to take a stronger antibiotic to kill off those ones. That's why when you take an antibiotic, even if you start feeling better, you need to take all of the antibiotic pills just to make sure that you completely get rid of everything so it don't come back and make you even more sick. So, what are some bacteria that can cause infection? Some of the common ones are Streptococcus, and Streptococcus cause strep throat. They can cause scarlet fever, and they can cause impetigo. Most people throughout their life will probably experience strep throat. Hopefully you never have to deal with scarlet fever or impetigo. Staphylococcus cause skin infections. They can cause food poisoning and pneumonia. A staph infection, you can see this is a staph bacteria up here. Depends on, obviously, the individual bacteria. There's different types, but also where the bacteria is. So if you have a staph bacteria on your skin and it's the one that causes the skin infections, then you can have some problems. But if it's the one that causes pneumonia that's just on your skin, it may not be as bad. So there are different variants of strep and staph infections. It just depends on which strain you get. Another one that most everybody deals with at some point in their life, Propionibacterium acne. Name says it all, it causes acne. It causes those zits that you get that everybody absolutely hates. Now moving on to some of the older ones that are still around. These ones are still around very much. Yersinia pestis causes plague. We're going to go more in depth on plague in our next couple of lessons. Yersinia pestis is a very dangerous bacteria, and it is still active. We don't hear a lot about it because most people don't get infected with it. One of the places where it can be considered somewhat common, but honestly a few cases a year in the Southwest. states in the US, they can have organisms that can carry plague, and if you happen to come into contact with them, you can end up catching it. Luckily, we have developed treatments that help with Yersinia pestis, but overall, it's still not something you want to catch. And then Mycobacterium leprae causes leprosy. Leprosy is a disease that you've probably heard about more in the church because they talk about Jesus healing lepers. And these would have been people who had leprosy. So leprosy, once again, it's another disease. It's not a good one to have. It kind of really messes with your skin and makes your skin almost fall off. So both of those are a couple of not so fun bacteria that can cause a lot of problems. Moving on to the fungi. When we think of fungi, we think of mushrooms or things like that. Well, fungi can be found as either a single cell or multicellular organisms. Fungi are going to typically be decomposers. They're going to be found in warm and damp environments. Most fungi do not cause infections. Some are toxic if ingested, obviously. I mean, you've heard of poisonous mushrooms. So some are toxic if ingested, and some are perfectly safe for humans to eat. So when we talk about these, we're going to talk about a few specific ones. When you are treating a fungal infection, you need something called an antifungal medication. These can come in the form of pills, but more than likely it's going to be some sort of ointment that you would have to take in conjunction with maybe some sort of pill. Because most of your fungal infections are going to be on your skin. So, a couple of the most common ones, ringworm. It's caused by Tinea corpus, and have a couple pictures of that up there. Ringworm is in fact not a worm, but a fungus that just happens to be in a ring shape. And athlete's foot, very similar, Tinea pedis, is another fungus, and it grows very commonly on the feet. Another fungi that causes some major issues is called Aspergillus, and it causes aspergillosis. The common name for Aspergillus, and this is not always going to be the case because not every black mold is Aspergillus, but black mold can be known as Aspergillus. Like Aspergillus is called black mold sometimes. If it is found in your house, it can be very dangerous. It will, if it gets into your lungs, can cause problems, especially if you have a weakened immune system. So Aspergillus is definitely something that if you happen to find any in your house, you want to be very careful. And this is a very extreme case of mold found in a house, but this is what the Aspergillus would look like on a microscopic scale. And then finally, another common one is thrush/yeast infections. It's called by Candida albicans. Thrush is typically found in little kids, and they get like white bumps in their mouth. And once again, that one's pretty easy to take care of. A visit to the doctor, they would be able to give you medication to help you take care of that. Protozoa. Protozoa are single-celled organisms. They're much larger than bacteria, though, and they have a nucleus and other organelles. Bacteria most often don't. Protozoa love water and moist, wet places. Some diseases caused by protozoa are often spread through water because that's where they like to live. And some of these protozoa are also parasites. So some treatments include anti-protozoal medications, and it also depends greatly on what you have. So some examples of protozoa are going to be malaria is the disease, and it's caused by Plasmodium. Typically, these are transferred around by something known as a vector. In the case of malaria, the vector are mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes carry the plasmodia. Then you have Giardiasis, and it's caused by Giardia. Toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is caused by Toxoplasma, and toxoplasmosis is a big reason why when a woman is pregnant, they shouldn't mess with cleaning cat litter because toxoplasmosis is commonly found in cat feces. So a litter box would have a high likelihood of having toxoplasma in it. And if you're cleaning a litter box and you're pregnant and that gets into you, it really can affect a baby a lot more than it would affect a full-grown human. And then another one is African trypanosomiasis, and it causes what is known as African sleeping sickness. You can see here these are the protozoa that cause African sleeping sickness, but they are transferred around by this little dude here known as a tsetse fly. If you get bit by a tsetse fly, there's a chance that it could transfer these protozoa into you if they happen to be carrying them. Like I said, obviously by the name, it's common more so in Africa than it is around the rest of the world because they do need the tsetse fly to be able to transfer the protozoa. Helminths. Helminths are more commonly known as parasitic worms that infect humans. Yeah. These are one of the few infectious agents where, when full grown, they can be seen without a microscope. One thing of note with a lot of the things that we've been looking at, you can't see them without a microscope. Helminths are one that you can see. They can't multiply in humans. So what actually happens is they grow and they live in humans, but they can't make more of themselves inside humans. So they typically find a way to get their eggs out and hope that their eggs end up infecting somebody else. So the medicine to treat helminths depends on which one you have that is causing the infection. Typically, it's going to involve something that would end up causing wherever the worm is to kill the worms and allow your body to get rid of them. Some common examples are roundworms, like you see here, and this one over here is a tapeworm. You can have hookworms, and they're kind of similar to these with the hook shape. And you can have ones called trematodes or pinworms. Pinworms are very common in little children. Typically, like if somebody gets one in a daycare, it typically gets spread around to everybody in the daycare. And a lot of these helminths are transferred via a process known as the fecal-oral route. So a lot of them live in the intestines, so they release their eggs go through the intestine and out, and then they end up getting transferred because people don't wash their hands or practice proper hygiene, or especially in lower income countries where they may not have as good sewage systems. Then somehow somebody comes into contact with eggs that were in there, and then they get transferred. Like if you touch something that somebody had the eggs on their hand, they touch something, you touch it, and then you touch your mouth. There you go, you just transferred, and it goes from fecal to oral. And finally, prions. A prion is kind of a unique one. It's definitely not visible. You can't see it, but it's caused by an abnormally folding protein. So, as we know, we have a lot of proteins in our body. These can be genetic, and they typically affect the brain, leading to brain damage and eventually death. There is research being done into possible treatments for prion diseases, but at this time there are no cures or anything right now for prion diseases. So what it does is it takes a normal human brain that looks like this and turns it into a sponge almost. Makes it look like a sponge. So some of the examples of prion diseases are Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease and variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Gerstmann-Straussler-Scheinker syndrome, fatal familial insomnia, and Kuru. They're all not good. I do remember learning about fatal familial insomnia. What happens is it typically occurs in families, obviously leading to the idea that it is genetic, but you cannot sleep no matter what. Like, we all have those days where like, oh, I'm not tired, I can't fall asleep, even though I should be asleep. But what literally happens is these people cannot fall asleep and they end up dying because your body has to have sleep to be able to survive. And it gets to a point where their body is no longer able to survive and they end up dying because they stay awake. They're staying awake and they can't sleep. There are a couple of these that are found in animal species as well. A common one is called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as, aka, mad cow disease. So the way I always remember kind of how a prion affects something is by the word spongiform, because I think of it turning the brain into a sponge. So whenever I see spongiform, it reminds me that, oh, this is, when I think of prions, I think spongiform, and I think, okay, so it's turning the brain kind of into a sponge. Now, more related to us here in Missouri is another prion disease called chronic wasting disease. It's also commonly called blue tongue disease, but it's being found in the white-tailed deer population. And so, as most of you guys know, where I originally am from is a small town. A lot of people hunt deer, and unfortunately there was a deer farm where one of the deer had chronic wasting disease and it ended up spreading to the wild population around. It's typically spread by contact of nose to nose. So if one deer bumps up against another's nose, then they can catch it. They're trying to control it and keep it from spreading. As you know, in Missouri we have typical hunting seasons, and deer season is typically early November timeframe. But in areas with chronic wasting disease, they are giving individuals special permission to try to hunt some of these deer, and it's kind of obvious in the way that they act if they have chronic wasting disease. And so they're trying to eliminate as many of these deer who have this disease as possible to help protect the rest of the healthy population and keep it from spreading further out from where it currently is. So out of all of the different infectious agents that we've talked about today, prions are probably one of the scariest because there's really not a lot that we can do for it. But overall, they're all pretty interesting, and we're going to spend a little more time going in depth to them as we go through, talking about specific diseases related to individual infectious agents. So we'll talk about bacterial disease, viral diseases, those sort of things. And then finally, we'll end this with a project for the unit that hopefully you guys will all enjoy. So don't forget to go check the classroom website. You will find your due now, and you will also find your assignment for this lesson, which is an article over how antibiotics came about and how they work and different types. Remember, if you have any questions, please, please, please reach out to me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.